It all started during finals week at Franklin College. The campus was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that made every creak of a floorboard sound like a gunshot. It was close to midnight, and I was cramming for my history exam in the dorm lounge. My roommate, Ben, had fallen asleep hours ago, leaving me alone with a pile of textbooks and a half-empty energy drink. That's when I heard it, the scream. First, I thought it was just someone messing around. People did weird things during finals, and pranks weren't unusual. But this wasn't a laugh-it-off kind of scream. It was a raw, blood-curdling shriek, filled with so much terror it sent chills up my spine. I froze, the pen in my hand hovering above my notebook. Then it happened again. The sound came from the hallway leading to the basement. It wasn't an ordinary part of the dorm, just a dusty storage area no one ever used. But tonight, the hallway felt alive, like it was breathing with an energy I couldn't explain. I shouldn't have gone to check it out. I mean, who in their right mind would? But something about the scream made it impossible to ignore, like it was a cry for help. My legs moved before I could stop them, carrying me into the dimly lit corridor. The closer I got, the heavier the air felt, as if I were walking through water. The faint hum of the building's old pipes became louder, almost like whispers. I reached the basement door. It was one of those old, heavy ones with peeling paint and a rusted handle that squealed like a dying animal when I turned it. The scream had stopped, but the silence on the other side of the door was worse. It was suffocating, the kind of silence where your own heartbeat feels deafening. The stairwell was steep and poorly lit, the bulbs overhead buzzing faintly. Each step echoed, the sound bouncing off the cement walls like a warning. I gripped the railing, my hands slick with sweat. A part of me hoped I'd find nothing down there. Maybe some frat kid pulling a prank or a drunken mistake. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. This wasn't normal. The basement was cold. Colder than it should have been for May. My breath fogged in the stale air, and the smell hit me. A rancid mix of mildew and something metallic, like rust. Or blood. The storage area was cluttered with old furniture, broken desks, and cardboard boxes stacked haphazardly. Shadows stretched long and jagged, twisting with each flicker of the dim light bulbs. I took a few cautious steps forward, scanning the room. That's when I saw it. A single shoe. It was lying in the middle of the floor, a plain white sneaker, except for the streaks of something dark smudged across it. Blood. My stomach turned, but my feet kept moving as if pulled by some unseen force. Then I noticed the drag marks. Faint at first, but unmistakable. They cut through the dust on the floor, leading past the rows of boxes to an old wooden door at the far end of the basement. I stopped in my tracks, staring at it. The door was slightly ajar, a faint sliver of darkness leaking out like a wound. A sound came from beyond it, a faint scratching like nails on wood. My rational mind was screaming at me to turn around, to bolt up the stairs and never look back. But something else, a morbid curiosity or sheer stupidity, pushed me forward. The scratching grew louder as I approached, more frantic, like whatever was behind the door knew I was coming. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the handle. Then slowly, I pushed it open. The room beyond was pitch black, the kind of darkness that felt alive, pressing against me like a physical weight. I fumbled for a light switch and found none. The scratching had stopped, replaced by a low, guttural growl that sent ice through my veins. "Hello?" My voice came out as a whisper, barely audible over the sound of my own heartbeat. Then something moved in the darkness. The movement was subtle at first, just a shift in the shadows. My phone was in my pocket. With trembling fingers, I pulled it out and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating what looked like an old boiler room. Pipes crisscrossed overhead, dripping water into shallow puddles that gleamed like mercury. The walls were streaked with grime, and the smell was overwhelming. Decay, rust, and something else I couldn't place. I swung the light across the room, and that's when I saw them. Dozens of them. They reflected the light like a cat's, but they weren't just in one place. They were everywhere, peering out from the corners, behind the pipes, even from the ceiling. They blinked, one by one, like a synchronized wave. My chest tightened, and the air seemed to thicken. "What the hell?" I whispered, stepping back instinctively. A deep, guttural sound rumbled from the shadows, something between a growl and a laugh. It echoed off the walls, disorienting me. The eyes began to move now, slowly at first, shifting closer. I shone the light on one of them, and the beam caught something in its full, horrifying detail. It wasn't human. The creature was gaunt and skeletal. Its skin stretched tight over its frame, gray and leathery. Its limbs were too long, bending at unnatural angles as it crawled across the wall. Its face, if you could call it that, was a grotesque parody of humanity, with hollow cheeks, no nose, and a wide, lipless mouth filled with jagged teeth. Its eyes were black pits, glowing faintly in the light. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping my phone. More of them emerged from the shadows, crawling down the walls and across the floor. Their movements were jerky, insect-like, but their focus was clear. They were staring at me, all of them. I turned to run, but the door slammed shut with a deafening clang. The sound was so sudden, I almost screamed. My flashlight beam flickered, and panic clawed at my throat. I threw my weight against the door, but it wouldn't budge. The air was alive with their guttural sounds, a cacophony of growls, laughs, and hisses that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Something cold and wet brushed against my ankle. I whipped the light down to see one of them, smaller than the rest, crawling toward me on its belly, its bony fingers reaching out. I kicked at it, the sole of my shoe connecting with its jaw, and it let out a shriek that pierced my ears. That was all it took. They swarmed. The swarm descended like a living nightmare. They moved in unison, their limbs skittering over the floor and walls, their guttural cries echoing in the confined space. I swung my flashlight wildly, the beam flickering as their shadows grew and twisted. My mind screamed at me to move, but my body felt frozen in place. Then instinct took over. I bolted toward the boiler, the only spot in the room where I could gain some height. My foot slipped on a puddle, but I caught myself, scrambling onto the metal platform. The creatures followed, their clawed hands scraping against the steel, pulling themselves closer. I felt a bony hand brush my leg and kicked blindly, sending one of them tumbling to the floor. My phone's light blinked out, plunging the room into total darkness. No, no, no! I frantically slapped the screen, but it wouldn't come back on. Their guttural growls surrounded me, closing in. I fumbled in my pocket for anything useful, and my fingers closed around the cheap lighter I used for candles. With shaking hands, I flicked it on, the tiny flame barely illuminating the chaos around me. Then I saw it. In the far corner of the room, behind a tangle of pipes, was another door. It was heavy, rusted, and half hidden by shadows, but it was there, a way out. I jumped down, the creatures shrieking as I landed among them. One of them grabbed my arm, its claws digging into my flesh. I screamed, twisting free, the pain sharp and searing. Another lunged at me from the side, and I swung the lighter, the flame briefly catching its leathery skin. It recoiled with a hideous scream, giving me just enough time to sprint for the door. I reached it, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The handle was cold and slick, and for one horrifying second, I thought it wouldn't turn. But it did, the door creaking open just as the creatures closed in. I threw myself through and slammed it shut behind me, locking it with a rusted bolt. Silence. I leaned against the door, my chest heaving, the pain in my arm throbbing. My lighter flickered, casting weak light on my surroundings. I was in another stairwell, this one leading up. The air was damp and cold, but I didn't care. I climbed, every step an effort as adrenaline gave way to exhaustion. The stairs led to an old maintenance exit, its door chained but loose enough for me to squeeze through. I emerged outside into the cool night air, collapsing onto the grass behind the dorm. The campus was still and quiet, the faint hum of streetlights the only sound. For a moment, I just lay there, staring up at the stars. The events of the last hour, or however long it had been, felt surreal like a fever dream. but the deep gashes on my arm and the blood smeared on my clothes told me otherwise. I stumbled back to my dorm, avoiding the main entrance and climbing through a side window into my room. Ben was still asleep, snoring softly. I locked the door behind me, grabbed my first aid kit, and sat on the floor, shaking as I cleaned the cuts on my arm. They were deep but not life-threatening. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the building, every shadow cast by passing cars, sent my heart racing. By morning, I had convinced myself to tell someone, a professor, campus security, anyone. But when I returned to the basement later that day, it was locked. Maintenance claimed they didn't have a key, that it had been sealed off years ago. But I knew what I saw. I dropped out of Franklin College a week later. I couldn't stay there, not with the knowledge of what was lurking beneath the dorm. Sometimes, late at night, I think I hear them, the faint scratching, the guttural growls echoing in my mind, and I wonder if they remember me too.